Welcome back, everybody. It's two guys and a stack of comics. My name's Mike, and that's Reed over there. And behind me is a stack of comics. And we just wanted to talk a little bit with you today about the new subject that came out of Watchmen, a new animated series or a new animated, I guess it's a two-part animated movie. Is that right, Reed?
Yeah, so DC, as they do often, making animated films and adaptations of classic stories. I believe they broke Watchmen into two parts, and the first part kind of came out this week. So I think the second part's scheduled for later this year. But yeah, it's interesting. You and I both love the story. We've done a video before talking about how much we like Watchmen, how we feel it's one of the only things in comic books that's not overrated. It is seen as the greatest comic book story of all time. It really, truly is. When you read it, it's absolute masterwork. But I think the interesting thing that this kind of leads to, we have another animated adaptation of this thing. We've had a feature-length animation, obviously from our movie from Zack Snyder. There was a sequel series in TV. There was Doomsday Clock that brought in the Watchmen characters. We had before Watchmen the comic book series. And to be honest, pretty much all of those have been disappointing. The Watchmen movie from Snyder, I'll give some credit. I think that's actually better than people give it credit for. But getting another adaptation, I think the thing that me and you were thinking, and I saw less in the comments on the videos for the movie, for the trailer when it came out, is it time for DC to just let Watchmen end? Do we really need any more adaptations of this? So for you, Mike, I know you love this just as much as I do. Do you think it's just time for DC to just stop the story, just retire it, let it go?
I had this feeling when Doomsday Clock came out, and I was all excited for Doomsday Clock. I was like, "Oh, this is going to be great." And I added it to my sub list. About two, three, four issues in, I was like, "I don't know what's going on. This is weird." Um, and it just felt a little bit to me like, DC's trying to milk it for more than it is. But to me, number one, you got Alan Moore. And if he's done with the story, you probably should be done with the story. If you don't have Alan Moore on board writing it,
And
if
we
he's
we
not
know for dang sure Alan Moore ain't going to be on board.
if he's not going to write, I'm just and then you got the great art of Dave Gibbons. And oh, by the way, you'll probably never see this again. A
A
graphic
thing that
novel,
thick with one artist and one writer. Yeah, on
right?
it.
You'll never see that
If
again. I
Watchmen
mean,
was published now by issue three, there'd be a fill-in artist. You'd have a new artist by issue six, and yeah,
yeah, yeah. And so the thing of it is, I mean, it is totally great for what it is. Like we said in our original video on Watchmen, probably one of the greatest comic stories ever told.
yep.
It's a masterpiece, and I have to wonder if you know, and I don't follow the media like probably some of you do, and comment down below if you do, but I just have to wonder if Alan Moore doesn't kind of spin in his,
Been
his,
in his chair. Well, we know
his
he's not. We know he's not a fan of
when
anything DC's done.
whenever they bring it out again, they like cart it out like, oh, we can do this with it. Oh, we can do that with it. The movie, I will say, is great. I know a lot. There's a lot of haters of the movie, but I really like the movie. And I think you did too, right, Reed? Right?
For an adaptation, I'm not a Zack Snyder guy, but I think that's one of the only movies he was actually a good choice for. And I do think, for as impossible as Watchmen is to get right in one movie, he did as good as anybody is going to do
You could,
adapting. It's not perfect because this is what, 400 pages and 12 issues. You're not going to get that in a single movie accurately, but
no.
as good as you could, especially with some of the director's cuts. And I think the one I ended up watching was like some 3.5 hour version that's actually really, really good. Um, yeah, I agree with you. I just think it's time to stop. I think one of the things is we know Alan Moore disapproves of it. Now I'll say Alan Moore seems to disapprove of comic books, period, across the board. So
Right.
some of that is, yeah, obviously his preference. But I think the biggest thing with Watchmen is There are just some stories that don't need to continue. Like you, I picked up Doomsday Clock, and I loved the creative team. I think it was Gary Frank and Jeff Johns. I'm like, man, great artist, great writer. Um, it just didn't work. It didn't work, and that Doomsday Clock to me was the Doomsday Clock was the thing of you cannot make this work past what it was supposed to be. And I think the biggest reason is these characters were never designed to have continuing adventures and go on to another day. Part of the appeal of comic books, of a Batman story, a Wolverine story, a Superman, Spider-Man story, is the hero swings off and you know there's going to be an adventure another day. Right. And they were making Batman comic books 50 years before I was born, and they'll probably be making them 50 years after I die. And that's the thing about these characters. They're timeless. They carry on. It's always another adventure, another adventure, another adventure. Watchmen was never designed to be that way. Rorschach and Night Owl and all these characters, they're not comic book superheroes. They're just simply not.
And I haven't read the history of it. There's probably people who know so much about the history of it, but I kind of have an inkling uh, from Alan Moore's personality that he kind of created this, probably thinking it would never get published. And then to his chagrin, they kept asking him for more issues. And, because it was an anti-comic book, he is really trashing the
The
and
idea of superhero
deconstructing,
was,
yeah,
yeah.
deconstructing the superhero as a genre in the medium. And so it was really, it was a masterpiece. And I
Well,
kind
and
of
I
think he
think,
probably was shocked in a lot of ways as how well it was received and the legs that it had. He probably
yeah,
never
that
thought,
it's still being, and I know
yeah,
DC has done all kinds of backhanded things to kind of keep it, because it was supposed to be that once it wasn't published, Moore and Gibbons were supposed to own the rights to it, and then DC. That's why every year you get a new version of Watchmen printed with some lenticular cover, or go to Walmart or Target every year. DC puts out some version of Watchmen so that it's a new version, so that they can retain the rights on it. I just think the biggest thing is, I think sometimes the greatest thing you can do for a story is actually let it end. And I
yeah,
look at that. There's movies where I just don't ever want a sequel. Like, I'll be honest, this year it kills me because there was a trailer for it. But one of my favorite films of all time is Gladiator. I think Gladiator, top to bottom, probably one of the greatest films ever. Certainly I think maybe my second or third favorite movie ever. The thing about that movie, it's perfect. It doesn't need anything else added to it. The movie said everything that it needed to say in that film. Now, of course, as I say that, because of Hollywood, they're dragging out a Gladiator 2 this year in theaters. But I think the thing is, there are some stories that are just designed that that's it, man. There was no more to say. We said everything, and that's what Watchmen is. Rorschach and Night Owl and Dr. Manhattan and Silk Spectre, they're good characters that were created. They're not good in terms of people. They're not good in terms of superhero characters, but they were great for what they meant in that story. But once
absolutely.
you throw a Batman into the story or a Superman into the story, it breaks the entirety of Watchmen. Because that's the whole point of this story, as I always took it, was what would superheroes have done in real life? How would it have changed the world? And you can't have a Batman figure in that. It breaks the immersion of it. And so I think I get it. They want to do these animated adaptations and all that, but all you're doing is you're just treading the same ground over and over and over and over again.
So this animated adaptation, is it going to be a true adaptation of
Yeah,
this?
I mean, from what I saw from the trailers, it looked like an one, and I didn't. Oh yes, I normally check out the DC animated films. I didn't watch it, not because it looked bad or anything awful about it. It's just we've seen this story. Like,
Yeah,
it's done, guys. Like, it's just time, And I think that's the thing, is it demeans the story every time there's a new version of it. And that one of the interesting things I think about this is it's just there's nothing that can go on forever, and it's actually a good idea, right? Like, my favorite athlete of all time is Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan had the perfect walk-off moment.
yeah,
98 finals, hits a game-winning jumper. That's it. That should have been it. 6 championships. Last shot is literally a game-winning shot in a championship. That could have been it. Instead, 3 years later, he came back and was broken down and played on the Washington Wizards for 2 years. And his fans were trying to block that out of our memory of that being Michael Jordan. And it's the same for Watchmen. Every time they do one of these new adaptations, this was perfect. This was perfect. It didn't need anything else. It didn't need, a prequel series. It didn't need a sequel series. And I think it demeans it every time that it comes out. And I think the biggest reason it does is I think we now get people who don't really understand the characters in Watchmen. These are not, Rorschach is not a hero. Dr. Manhattan is not a hero. These are broken, bad people who
Yeah.
basically abuse their power. They at times will do things that could be perceived as, I guess, heroic, but they are not good people. They're not supposed to be like action figure characters that, yeah, like it's not. And I think that's the most interesting thing about Watchmen is, like you said, it was a deconstruction of superheroes. And I think one of the reasons Alan Moore hates it so much, as he's talked about, I think he felt like it was damaging to comic books because now everybody wants to do their version of Watchmen. They want to do their dark story. And they don't have the talent that he did. And in all honesty, it doesn't work because that's not, these characters work because they're original, because you put them in there and that's how they exist. Trying to jam Batman into the role of Rorschach and Superman into the role of Dr. Manhattan and Black Canary into the role of Silk Spectre, it doesn't work. That's not what it was ever supposed to be. And I think that's why these adaptations always seem to fall flat. I know the HBO kind of sequel series they did got some awards and good reviews, but in honesty, it had about as much to do with Watchmen as anything else did. I mean, it really wasn't much of a carry on for it. It's
It
just
was
interesting.
it was strange that that show, although good, had such little to do with the Watchmen. I remember watching every week when it came out, thinking there was going to be a little more of a tie-in, and it was just its own separate story with like the Watchmen label slapped across it. It was a good story, but it didn't. I don't know.
I think
Anyway,
it's just time.
I think it's time to let it go, but I don't think DC is ever going to let it go. If some money can be made, they're going to squeeze it, and it's got to. It probably ticks Alan Moore off because
Oh, we know it ticks Alan, but everything ticks Alan more off.
he's kind of a misanthrope, from what I understand, right?
Yeah, he's very anti-comic book. And again, I think one of the things I'll say is, Alan Moore's complaints with Watchmen and Alan Moore's complaints overall with comic books. I do think he has a lot of logic in some of the things he says, in that we did take comic books too far. I think that's the worst thing about Watchmen is I think people, instead of seeing this for the unique story that it was, started going, "Ooh, I could put that into Batman. I could put that into X-Men. I could put that into," and that was never how it was supposed to be. And I think it's
Yeah,
why we've alienated so many kids from the comic book audience, because we took it
especially
to a level that shouldn't be at.
especially with the DC line. I mean, when you look at Frank Miller's Dark Knight and this book coming out almost the same year, I believe, and then everything that followed for the last 30 years has been so dark, and it kind of got darker, kind of like a one-upsmanship. But the thing is, you could never one-upsman this one. I mean, this
Yeah,
this one was like, you can't go darker and
you're gritty, you're grounded, or whatever. It's just
no,
not going to be.
you can't go there with that and have it be mainstream. But it was unique for its time. It changed the way comic books were written, not for the better, in my opinion. And we're still recovering from the Watchmen wake. We really are.
It
And
kind of reminds me of the Dark Knight trilogy of Batman films. I love those. I think those are the greatest superhero movies ever made. But the reason those are good is you had Christopher Nolan, who is talented enough that, like, he can make a biopic of Oppenheimer and it makes $900 million. Like, you have a special talent who can do that. The thing is, he created this tone that was dark in those movies the same way Moore did here. And what DC learned, instead of going, man, if we get a master craftsman who can write a serious story or direct a serious story, that's the key, right? Match the tone to the director or the tone to the writer. Instead, DC just went, oh, they like dark. let's just make everything dark. And I think that's why the DCEU failed, is they kept trying to think they could make Zack Snyder Chris Nolan. And it's like, no, man. The reason the Dark Knight trilogy worked is you had the special sauce of Chris Nolan and Christian Bale and all those great actors who were in that. You can't do that with Zack Snyder and Henry Cavill. You can't do that with, Zack Snyder and Ezra Miller as the Flash. It doesn't work. And that's the same thing for comics. This worked because you had Alan Moore probably at his absolute peak as a writer, in terms of, I think he was coming off a Swamp Thing and some of those other Captain Britain and stuff like that he did that really elevated the material. It's just, it's not meant to go on that way. The thing that DC should learn from Watchmen is, what you do is you find a truly great artist and you give them the reign that they gave Alan Moore. You let them take the risks and create their own characters and create their own story, instead of going, hey, let's try to turn Jeff Johns into Alan Moore. And I think that's unfortunate. Like you said, that's what we're still recovering from, is instead of comic books being smart enough to go, look, you guys don't need to do Alan Moore's thing, right?
Yeah,
Like, just, you don't have to
that
be
was
Alan
done.
Moore.
That's
And,
done.
and that, I think that's the thing, is Alan Moore's, I don't know if he's the greatest comic book writer of all time, but he's up there. And the
Yeah.
thing is, it's kind of, again, me and you talk about sports all the time. It's like when a quarterback comes out and they try to go, oh, he's going to be the next Tom Brady. No, there is no next Tom Brady. The guy won 7 Super Bowls. He played until he was in his 40s. Like, there's no next version of that guy coming. You just got to be the best version of yourself, and maybe you'll approximate close to what that man was, but you're never going to be what he was. And I think that's the biggest thing we see in comic books, is we see guys who are chasing these legacies, and they think like, well, okay, Alan Moore really broke down heroes and did this deconstruction, so I'll do that. And it's like, it's been done already. We don't need you to do that. Actually, it would be more interesting for you to do something akin to like what Darwin Cook did, where it was
A
actually like
reconstruction.
constructing superheroes and
Right.
showing why they mattered and why they're heroic. We need more of that, instead of, and I think that's just the most interesting part. I love that you brought up Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns, because that's a comic book. Same thing with The Killing Joke, which is Alan Moore too. And that, I think Batman still recovers from those 2 comic books. I love those personally. I think they're great comics. Obviously, they have their reputation. You Google top Batman stories, those 2 always come up. But in all honesty, it kind of dragged the character to a place that's just unsustainable. Those work in really kind of siloed off stories that never touch the main DC universe. But instead, because we can't leave well enough alone, it's like, I'm going to do my version of The Dark Knight Returns. I'm going to do my version of The Killing Joke. And it's like, but no, those stories are not meant to be replicated. The same way you're not going to get another Michael Jordan or another Tom Brady or another Barry Bonds or another Babe Ruth, you're not going to get another one of those kind of stories. And I don't get why comic books do that. I wish they would learn the lesson, is just get a guy who can write a great story and give them a little bit of free reign like they did those guys, instead of going, hey, go recreate something that had never been done before. It just, and I think that's why I think it's why we get tired of Watchmen stuff. And that, I saw the trailer for the movie. It looked okay. Like, the voice work was a little off and it did seem a little dated on the animation, but it looked decent. It looked like a faithful retelling. And I just saw it and I was just like, nah, man, I think it's good to just let that rest. It's kind of, so often we see franchises that just drag out over and over and over and over and over again, and rarely does it make it better. I mean, you look at so many great franchises like Predator and Alien and Star Wars and stuff, and those have been dragged out longer than I think they were ever supposed to. And normally it
Hey,
doesn't make the
not
story
not
better.
Star Wars, not Star Trek.
I Star Trek has seen better days, my friend,
I know. And
than what
Star
they're
Wars
at.
has too.
Star
But
Wars has too. No, and that's the thing is, I think what we've done in fiction, and I think this is comic books, period, right now. So why we see so many replicated events and why we see so many repetitive characters is, instead of taking the lesson of, let's just give a creator the room to do what he wants to do. It's like, oh, go create Star Trek that looks like old Star Trek. And it's like, no, just do a new story, do something fresh, do something original. You don't have to try to reinvent the same thing someone's already done. And it'll be interesting. I think we've seen this too, movies, right? How many people tried to replicate the MCU? Right? There was the DCEU couldn't do it. There was supposed to be what, a shared monsters universe of like the old Universal monsters. That didn't work. Star Wars was even trying that with spin-off movies for different characters. That didn't work. Like, the MCU was the MCU because it was first and it worked and that happened. And that's kind of what Watchmen was and these other stories. And I think sometimes we just need to learn the lesson of it's okay to let a story be done. It doesn't mean that the story's bad. It just means it was perfect. And it doesn't need to go on.
What? Look at all the great things that are happening with Geiger and Red Coke and
Yeah. No, it's why those are exciting. I think that's one of the great things is like that. It's interesting because I found myself, reading comic books and I was like, man, the best comics I've read outside of Conan the last couple months have all been that Ghost Machine line. And a lot of it's because like they're not treading the same ground. I don't know what's going to happen. Like a character could die. I have no idea if this character who was introduced is meant to last 30 years or meant to last 3 issues. And I think some of that unpredictability makes it great. And that's what Watchmen captured it perfectly is
you
that
didn't
these
know what was
characters
going to
got an
happen
end.
when as you got into the story, every turn, you didn't know what was going to happen. I mean,
No,
it was
I will
great
never remember
storytelling.
I will never forget the first time that I read it, and I don't think there was a movie at the time. I didn't know this was pre-internet, so I didn't really know. I knew it was really famous, and I think rented it from the library. And you get to that last page where they like explode Rorschach, and you're like, "What the heck?" And it's like
I
we don't
know.
have those type of moments anymore because all of these characters are these multimedia creations who have to exist as a movie and a cartoon and a video game and a comic book series and a spin-off video game series. And it's like,
That's why they call them properties.
yeah, they're properties. And that's the thing that Watchmen was never intended to be a property. It was a story.
Right.
And I think it's funny, like Watchmen to me exists in the same vein of like a book like Count of Monte Cristo. Count of
Yeah.
Monte Cristo does not need Count of Monte Cristo 2. It's
I think
done.
he covered it.
I, yeah,
Alexander
I think
Dumas.
Dumas did what he needed to do with that
Yeah.
story.
And all
And
900
and
pages of it.
yeah, and that
Yeah.
was it. Like we
Yeah.
didn't and that's why it's so great and why it's such a great enduring story. And I think Watchmen is the comic book version of one of those older novels that like you didn't need Great Expectations 2 from Dickens or something like that. Like
Right.
it's done. Like
Yeah.
that was the story, and that this was the comic book version of that. And unfortunately, they just don't seem to be able to accept that. But let us know what you guys think below. Do you think Watchmen just needs to retire? We know DC will keep doing new printings because they're never going to let those rights go back. And largely, look, I get it. They're a company. I wish they would be a little more honorable in what they said. But in all honesty, if you were a company and every year you can print a new Watchmen and make money off of it, you're probably going to do it. But I do hope they let the story die. But let us know what you guys think. Do you think Watchmen is a property? No more adaptations, just reprint the novel? Or is there something we're missing? Have you guys enjoyed these? Do you think they do add any life to it? And as always, we do know something. We do know on a comic book channel, most people probably know Watchmen. If you
Yes.
have not ever read it, though, and you've just let it be reputation, if you're one of the few that hasn't, please go check it out. Don't watch the adaptations of it. Read
Look at that.
this. This is one of the best stories you'll ever read.
It says
Yeah, I mean,
this says 100 best English language novels since 1923. Over
1920. No,
200.
there's a reason it has the reputation that it does. And if you're someone who's only seen the film, only seen the cartoon, or only seen the, whatever other adaptations they have, and you haven't read this,
It
read
won the
this.
Hugo Award. It
No,
won the
it's
Hugo.
in an age where everything is kind of overrated or overhyped. It's one of the rare things that is not. Like it actually lives up to what it is. As always, folks, thank you guys so much for watching. Let us know what you think below. Hope you have a great day. God bless you.
Thanks, everybody.